Alrighty, let's go ahead and dive in. Okay, I'm, I'm Joel Burton. I'm the VP of Education here at Rhythm School. I'm also the lead instructor for the cohort that's starting in August. I'm wrapping up my current class over the next few weeks. And then we're starting our next cohort of the program. Um, For a living, I've been an engineer for my career. I was a engineering manager at Apple Computer. I was the CTO at Planned Parenthood, an organization that has both a mix of antique technology and incredibly serious security requirements. And security programming is, in fact, been my specialty. But I switched over to teaching about 10 years ago, starting at universities and now at programs like Rhythm. And I've been here at Rhythm for about 5 years. So just a little bit about me. Uh, I'm super glad you're here. I will ask if it's possible for those of you that have your camera off, if it's possible for you to turn your camera on. I'd really appreciate it. A, it's a lot more pleasant to give presentations when you can see people. And B, I have a hearing disability. I partially lip read and I partially hear auditorily. And if I don't see your lips, I just won't be able to take questions from you because I won't understand what you're saying. So if you can turn your camera on or you're going to have questions during the program, I will need you to turn your camera on for me. I know that maybe not everyone has a camera or doesn't know how to turn it on or such. So obviously, if you can't, you can't. Anywho, what are we going to do? We're going to build a game using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I know all of you have been trying to learn some JavaScript or got some JavaScript under your belt or been building things. One of the more challenging things to do when you're learning this is you can learn some JavaScript, you can learn some HTML, you can learn some CSS, and you don't really know how to squish them together into something that does something. And so that's kind of the big topic. We're going to use building a Wordle game as our example, but this is mostly about seeing the connections between those three things. I'm going to focus specifically on JavaScript. I don't care whether you know a lot of CSS. We're not going to do a lot of fancy stylizing tonight, but I want us to understand how those three pieces play together. I've already talked a little bit about me, but I do have here my email address. If you're interested in learning more about Rhythm School or more about the things that I teach or such, feel free to drop me a line. You can also stalk me on GitHub. I have lots and lots of repos of student-facing projects and things I've worked on, or at the website that I shall not name, formerly known as Twitter. All right, a little bit about you. Hopefully, you're relatively new to this stuff. I'm not going to be going into super deep things tonight. I teach those kind of things for a living. It's kind of nice to teach things that are a bit earlier than that during these programs. But that you've got some JavaScript under your belt. If you're completely new to JavaScript, you've never written any JavaScript at all, you're welcome to hang out here and watch, though you may find it a little bit challenging to understand some of the things. I'll assume you've got some HTML, and at least you know what CSS is. Again, we won't focus a whole lot on CSS tonight. If you do want to follow along, it actually codefully, again, in the Zoom chat, I did send you a link to the handouts. And if you click on that up at the top, there's a link to download a zip file. And the zip file has both the code that we're going to start off with, as well as the solution as I write it when I'm not under pressure and writing it in front of people. So a slightly nicer, more tidied up, better formatted version of what we're going to build tonight. All right. We're going to be building Wordle, and I don't know if all of you know Wordle, so let's just take a look at it for a sec. Wordle's a puzzle game where the game has picked a secret 5-letter word that you don't know when you're playing it. As it turns out, for this particular game, the word it picked was Earth. And then you have 6 chances to guess that word. What you do is you enter an English word. It has to be a real word, so it can't just make up a 6-letter thing. And then it will score your guess. And it will score a yellow to mean there is an A in this word, the secret word, but you don't have it in the right place. So we could tell from the ARE here that the secret word contains ARE, but none of those are in the right place. And so a follow-up guess that I made was mares. And there's no M, there's no S in the word. Technically, I already knew that there was no S. This wasn't the best guess, but I'm not the best Wordle player. But the A and the R are in the right place. So then I tried farce, trying to figure out where that A was. So A and R in the right place, E not in the right place, and then I guessed Earth. Everything's in the right place. That's how it works. And that's what we're going to build tonight. So we're going to be using HTML for the visual display of our guessed words. That's going to be the table that shows all the guesses we've made. We're going to use HTML to give us the form where we type in our guess and we press submit to see the guess. We're going to use CSS just to make things look a bit prettier. Give us some of those color hints. Obviously, the game is not going to be very playable if we don't have a way of color distinguishing not a right letter, not in right place is in right place. So we'll use CSS for that, as well as just make it look decent. And then JavaScript, of course, will be our logic. And JavaScript will be where we'll end up having a function that scores a guess. Oh, that's the right word. That's not the right word, but these letters are right. Those kind of things. As well as then turning around and changing what the browser is showing us. So let's start off taking a look at some of the starter code I'm going to give us. So I've got some HTML here. There's nothing fancy in this HTML. There are a lot of different ways we could make a game board in HTML. I'm going to go with a pretty easy and straightforward way to think about this, that it's a table. It's a table that is 6 high. The table itself contains a row, that's the TR tag, if you don't know TR, table row. And within that row, I've got TDs, TD, table data, effectively a cell in the table. And so I've got 5 cells in each row. I've got 6 rows. And that's what's given us the game board that we see. I have my form down here for guessing a word. We're going to be looking at how in JavaScript we can intercept what you put in the form and plug it into our code. And then I'm loading up 2 JS files, words.js and Wordle.js. Let's take a look at words.js just to get a sense what's in it. And words.js is just 2 long arrays, one of every valid 5-letter word in English. Some of these are really common. Some of these, I don't know how often you use the word Panax, for example, or paoli, but tons and tons of words. And then I have a second, much shorter list of the words that are the 10,000 most popular in English, which these should hopefully be recognizable to most of us. Our secret word, the word that players are trying to guess, will come from this shorter, easier list. But when players make a guess, they can choose anything that's legal in English, even if it's not particularly common. That's the only thing in this file. So we won't be spending any more time in this file. This is just super long word file. And if you ever want to build another game like Boggle or things like that, hold on to this because it's nice to have a file that has a bunch of valid English words in it. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start things up here. So I'm going to open this up in my browser. I'm going to do this with a Mac specific command called open, but you may know other ways that you can open up with something in your browser. And I'm going to move this from Safari into Chrome. Give me one sec while I open a Chrome window because I don't want it to be too Mac specific looking. Okay, one sec. I'm just sharing that new window for you. Okay, so if I open this up originally, Here's what I see, just my table cells. I'm going to turn on my JavaScript developer tools. And again, I don't know how much you all know, so I'm going to introduce some things here just to get some layout of the land. But in these developer tools for JavaScript, I'm sure if you've done anything with JavaScript, you've taken a look in the console. The Elements tab will also show me live what the browser is showing me. And there's some nice disclosure arrows here so I can open this stuff up and I can see all those table cells. And you'll also notice as I hover over the, the HTML representation here on the right, it lights up on the left where things are. That can be really helpful when you're debugging and building things. And if I want to go the other way, I want to hover over something here and find out where it is in the HTML. This little arrow pointing to square under the Elements tab here, the Dev Console, the little arrow pointing to dotted square lets me hover over something in the table in the actual browser view, and then it will highlight that over here in the DOM, over in the represented HTML. So we're going to see that going back and forth with those things. That's just a sense of the HTML we're starting off with. If you do have questions, feel free to jump in, please. Just go ahead and wiggle your hand because I want to make sure that I'm looking at you. You start talking, please. We have some starting off CSS here. Again, I'm not too worried about how deep we get in CSS tonight, but if you have questions about any of the CSS you see, feel free to jump in. But some things that I'm doing. Hashtag words. Find the thing that has the ID of words, which would be my table has an ID of words. And so within my table, for every TD, every table cell, and this is where I'm just making a square, giving them background color, starting off with gray. Whether or not the letters are in uppercase, it's going to show them in uppercase and such. And then I have what we're definitely going to use in our JavaScript. I've got a class that makes things green for this is the correct place and make things goldenrod yellowish for whether it is a letter, but it's not in the right place. These are classes. Classes start with a dot in CSS, you may know. So if I give something the class of correct, it will change its background color. And this bang important is saying, override what you would normally do here. And that actually would be required here because I've already said a much more particular thing about it being gray. So override that. The most important thing is going to be to make those correct places forest green or goldenrod. And then I just have a little bit of style for the actual form where we're entering things in. So I've got an ID on that input where we're going to type in, and that just makes things centered in uppercase. If you're not familiar with building a lot of things in the browser, if you've been doing most of your JavaScript on the back end, doing more algorithmic things, one piece that's really handy about this Elements tab is not only can you explore things, but you can also do things here. You can change things. So I'm going to go here and I can look at what I can change about all of this stuff. So let's take a look. I'm going to come down here and click on Styles. And when I hover over this, it's going to show me what is affecting the current look of this. So it's showing me down here that, the thing that is selected that controls the look is this. And there are a bunch of other things, but they're arranged from most important to least important. If you want to temporarily hide some stuff, I can uncheck it. So I'm saying that my tables have a height of 0 now, or just the defaults, and you'll see that I can play with that. You can also double click on these things and try out different things. So a good way to play around when you're building stuff like this is do it in the browser itself. You can come here under the Style tab and you can influence how things look. Just hit undo or hit refresh. It'll reload your page. None of that stuff gets saved, of course. That's just in the browser representation. So we may come back and try that out a bit as we go. But that's our opening HTML and CSS. Let's start to put our heads in our JavaScript. And I'm going to start off with this. I'm going to start off with a kind of diagram called a call graph. And a call graph, this is an example of a call graph. A call graph is a diagram that shows us which function calls which function. At a high level, what's going to happen? When we click submit on the form, it's going to call a function called handle submit. Handle submit will call a function called try word. Try word will call score guess. Try word will also call update board. When we first start this page, we're going to run a function called start. Start will call a function called choose. Call graphs are not at all just for beginners. Call graphs are the best way of getting your head in how to design a program without having to spend any brain cells thinking about JavaScript syntax and is that a semicolon? Do I use a square bracket or a curly brace? It's also, and I teach a presentation on learning how to debug well in JavaScript that I do as well as this one. Call graphs are also the best thing for debugging because you can pull your head up and look at a drawing like this, and then as you watch the code run, you can see where it deviates from what it's supposed to do. I made this in some fancy graphic program, obviously, but in real life, I don't bother with that when I'm not giving presentations. I have the best tool that I ever had as a programmer, which is I have a huge deck of graph paper here inside my desk drawer and lots of colored markers, and that's how the pros do this kind of thing. But this is going to be the flow of our program. I've started off with some starter code for us. A little bit of stuff that's just very obvious and not worth really diving into tonight. And then basically placeholders for all of those functions so that we can build them out together. So if we start off here with our JavaScript, line 1, use strict. You may not have met use strict before, but JavaScript is a fascinating and slightly weird language. It's about 30 years old now. So it's got a long history, and some of the earliest history of JavaScript was pretty bad. JavaScript was meant for writing very tiny programs that ran in this brand new thing called a web browser, and there were a lot of things we hadn't figured out. And no one ever believed that people would write 100,000 line corporate website code in JavaScript. It was people were going to write 10-line JavaScript programs. So JavaScript had a lot of questionable early design decisions. If the very first line of your JavaScript file is exactly this, the words use strict in lowercase with a space as a string, if that's the very first line of your code, it puts JavaScript in a much more modern, sane mode. There's a bunch of kind of dumb things that JavaScript was originally designed to do that nowadays just confuses people. As an example, if you ever create a variable inside of a function, well, when you create a variable, you should be declaring it. You all may know let, or you may know var. For our purposes tonight, we're not going to worry about the difference between them, or you may know const. There are several ways to declare a variable in JavaScript. But if you just start talking about a variable in a function, old school JavaScript is like, whoa, I guess Joel wanted to make a global variable. I will make a global variable, a variable that's available throughout my program, which is exactly not what I meant. I just forgot to say let or var. Use strict fixes those kind of things. It just makes JavaScript a much more sane language. It's been around for a long time, so you should start putting that at the top of your programs because nobody uses the antique kind of crummy version of JavaScript or wants to. I have some variables here that we're going to use. I have what people often call a global constant. These are declared with const, so I can't change this. This is going to stay 6, and it's going to stay 5. Global constants are often really helpful for you to stop having to think about the numbers. As I write this program with you all, we're going to sometimes need to loop over the number of guesses, and we're going to sometimes need to loop over the individual words, letters in a guess, and trying to remember which one is 6 and which one is 5, and why does that line say 5? Am I looping over the words or such? Making global variables for that right up front is really helpful. So I've given us that to start off with, and then I've created two variables that we are going to change. How many guesses have the people made? And what is the secret word that they're going to be trying to find? So that's where we're going to start off there. And then I've just created the functions for these, but not put anything in. Now, there are two different ways we could start writing things. We could start writing the big functions here at the left. We could write handle submit, which is going to listen for submitting a form and do stuff. We could write the function called start. That's going to start things off. But I'll say that most of the time, and I would say most other professional programmers, are going to start with these functions, small functions that don't call other people, but are called by other people. Anyone want to take a brave swing at why this may be a much more popular and often a better approach on when you've figured out what you need to do, where to start? Let me tap you, Leah. Any idea there?
My best guess would be because everything else is like built upon it.
Hmm.
So like it I guess you don't have anything for the other things to work with if you don't build like probably the main part first.
Yeah, if I start building this, I can't
I
really
don't have an answer.
I can't really test it out. And so like a little part of my brain is worrying about did I screw that up while I start writing this, which is now trying to hold on to my brain. Is this still working while I'm building this? Whereas we're going to go with this process where we're going to build these much smaller, simple functions right now, and we're going to try them out immediately. And once we know they're working, I don't have to think about them anymore. And that is usually a much easier way. I'm also, we could have written this in maybe like 2 functions rather than 6 functions. I think it'll be a lot harder to understand when you try to have one function that does a whole bunch of things. You got a bug in it. Where is that bug even in that function? So we've split it up into smaller pieces. And we are going to, and I think your intuition was excellent there, Leah. We're going to start with those smallest pieces. Yeah, John, please.
So I know these aren't helper functions as they are there, but it's sort of a similar thing where you're going to write that so you don't have to worry about it later. You know it's working. Is that a way to think about it that makes sense?
I mean, there's no real definition of a helper function. It's just kind of like a function that helps something do something. So we could or could not say these are helper functions. That's just kind of a general term. But score guess is going to score a guess, and we're gonna test it out. We're gonna call it before we write anything else. We're gonna write that. We're gonna call it, and then see that it works. And once it does, that's going to be really reassuring. Now we can start building this. And if we have a bug when we write this, well, there's a very, very good chance our bug isn't in score guess because we already tried that out and that does what it wants. This is often called bottom-up programming. I have drawn this graph going from left to right rather than from top to bottom, just because it fits better on slides. But we're going to start with those things that are at the edge, the kind of leaves of the tree, if you will, and then move up to the branches and the bigger branches and so on. That's a really good way to build things. All right, so we talked about some of the basic stuff we have. let's start off with our first function. And I'll pull this up in my editor. Oh, I have provided a rather boring, uninteresting function for us called choose, which you give it an array of items and it picks and returns an item. Don't think that's as interesting as some of the other code we're going to read tonight. But I suspect if you've been programming JavaScript for at least a few weeks, you've written 17 versions of this. So here's a perfectly good one. You give an array of things, it picks one thing randomly and returns it. We're going to start off with score guess. And I've started us with two things. I've started us with some pseudocode or description about what our function needs to do. And then I've started off, and this is the single best thing I can tell you about debugging. Don't wait until you have a bug to add console log. Add a console log when you write a function. And you don't need anything fancy. I mean, I see people that, make all sorts of ASCII art and write everything in screaming case. Just, what's the name of your function? What are the arguments that take? Because I talk more about this in my debugging presentation, but I'll just tell you the one or two high-level thing there. The most common bug you will ever make in your first month of programming JavaScript, in your first year of working with JavaScript, if you're like me on your 28th year of working with JavaScript, the most common bug you will make is the line of code that you thought was running didn't run. You didn't call the function, you didn't enter the for loop, your if condition, this one or the one far away didn't get you there. And so the very, very best thing we can do is to expose what's happening in the program. When I call score guess, either when I call it directly, as I will in a few minutes, or when other things call it. Oh no. So I'm starting off with those console logs for us. Those are really, really lovely. But anyway, here's what we're going to do. We're being passed in the player's guess, which will be a string. So the player has like guessed apple, maybe, or the player's guessed moons, we'll go with. And the secret word we're just going to say for the sake of example is apple. Okay. So what are we going to do? Let's make an array of the secret word. So we're going to turn the secret word into an array so that we can mutate it. Because you can't mutate a string in JavaScript. And as we find there's a letter, we'll note that we've already done something with it. As we loop over each letter, if the letter of the guess is in the same place as it is in the secret, let's mark it as such. If it's not in the right place, but it's in the word at all, let's mark it as present. And so I've also given us here what's called a doc string, the kind of documentation that programmers write for other programmers or themselves when they come back and work on code. And it's showing what this function does and what kinds of things it should be passed. So if our secret word is apple and the guess is moons, well, moons has no right letters. So we're going to want a function that returns an array of 5 empty strings. If they guess alley, the A is in the right place. The first L is in the word apple, but not in the right place. And the second L is not in the word apple. This is how Wordle works. You only get, that letter appears once, if it appears once. And then the E is not in the right place, but it is present, and there is no Y in apple. So this should return an array of correct present. It's my second L, present. The E, excuse me, the second L is not present. The second L is the empty string. The first L is present. The E is present. The Y is not here at all. So that's what this function should return. Writing this kind of stuff down so you can look at it as you code, obviously a great idea. So let's do some work here. There are a few different ways to turn a string into an array. It doesn't matter which one you know about. I'm going to write it one way, but you may know other ways. Wow, my little ChatGPT plugin is being very helpful. Let me just turn that off so it doesn't pester us too much right now. Okay. I think its name was a fine name, so we'll go with that. And I'm gonna take the secret. Oh, excuse me. And I'll take the secret and I will make it into an array. And one way I can do this in JavaScript is I can just split on empty string. That will give me an array of each letter. You may know other ways to do that. If you know about destructuring, we could destructure the word into a list. That's also a fine way to go. There are other things. There's a method called array from. Whichever way you know how to do here's fine. I'm going to go with this, just split it. And then I want to loop over each letter in the secret, each letter of Apple. So we'll say for let I equals 0, I less than the length of our secret. I could get the length of the secret array or the secret word. They're both going to be the same length. I plus plus, very basic for loop. I'm sure you've written this kind of for loop before. And then I want to see if the first letter of their guess is the exact same as what is in the secret. So if the guess at I is equal to the secret at I have made an array here, and I'm going to start using that. Then this is definitely in the right place. Now, our function is going to return a new array of this information. So let's make an array. I return it already at the bottom. It's called results. So let's make an array here. I'm going to use let for a lot of this stuff, but you may know that I could use const for these things as long as I don't rebind them. That's fine if you want to think of it that way. Starting off with every letter is wrong. And as we learn different, we'll update this. And we have learned different, so we're going to say the results, the results that I should be correct. Otherwise, else if. Okay. Is this thing in the secret present at all in the word? So is the guess, excuse me, is the secret letter at I? And now I want to say, is it in the guess? And I can do that by saying, does secret array I'll use index of here, just to pick something that all of us know. Um, is this in their guess? And where is it? If this is, a lot of you will know that index of returns -1 for not found. So if I find it anywhere, well, let's mark that as present. Now we've got some bugs here. Got to start as some code, but this is some of the trickier code we're going to write tonight. So we've got a bug or two. Let's go back and look at our docstring. I'm looking over the actual secret to find out, if it's in the right place, matching exactly, and if so, I'm going to say correct. That's perfectly good. But then if I check that, is this letter of the secret, is A in their guess? Well, I'm going to be, let's say it's the 0th index, the first letter. I'm going to be saying 0 is present, but that's not going to be quite right. Let's take a look at the word paper, the guess paper. Remember that our secret is apple. If I loop over the secret, I'm on the A. A is not in the right place in paper, so it's not correct. But hey, my guess does contain an A. I'm going to mark position 1 as present. That's going to be marking the P as present, which would in fact be correct in this case, but it's not the right logic. It's putting the thing in the wrong place. So let's switch this around. We're going to loop over our guess. If the guess is in the same place as the secret array, we will mark it as good. Otherwise, let's take a look in our secret array to see if it has the guess. So we're thinking about the guess as our loop now. And if so, we'll mark this as present. All right. We haven't tested this stuff, so it looks pretty good. Okay, we'll return our results. First things first, I'm going to save. Let's come in, and best thing I can do, if you've tried programming where you write the whole thing and then run the whole thing and it doesn't work and you're like, which one of those 40 lines is wrong? You know how much fun that is. We're going to test these out as we go. So let's call score guess and pass in a guess and a secret. And I'll pass in moons and the secret of apple. Uh-oh, results is not defined. I think I just didn't hit refresh when I saved. There we go. Um, that's correct. Let's try out one of our other ones. Let's guess alley. Okay, got a typo here. Should be results, excuse me. Correct, present, 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 empty string. Correct, present. That shouldn't be present. That should be, that should be. So we got one thing that's missing. And if we take a look at this, we're looping over the guess, that's the word alley. A, correct and in the right place. L, not in the right place, but present. Second L, also present. But of course, there are no two L's in Apple. And we've got some pseudocode for this. Once we use a letter, let's take it out of the secret array. That's why we made the secret array mutable to a mutable thing. So I'm just going to set secret array at this location, and it doesn't really matter what I set it to. I'll set it to null, but I could set it to like an empty string, as long as it's not something that would ever be real. So in other words, we're never going to get to, unless there's two L's in the word, we're not going to count that second L. And if there is two L's in the word, we'll score exactly 2, but not 3. Save my work, hit refresh. So that right, to get this right. Secret array, secret array. I is here. This makes sense. John, what is I about right now? What is the meaning of I in this program so far?
Well, are you talking about the first loop or on the P?
In general, like this loop, what are we using? Like, which word are we looping over? The secret word or the guess?
Um,
I've given us a little hint in 42 there, John, just so we wouldn't get confused.
guess.
Yeah. And I'm going to say this is really nice code. I could have just typed in 5, but I think if I give myself a reminder, because I can make these kind of mistakes too, here's what I was looping over. Awesome. We're not using up that letter of the secret word. We're using up whatever the letter is for that guess. We can't, we're getting rid of that position of the secret array. Let's do this a little bit differently. Let's go and find where our guess is in the secret. Now, this is great code for doing on a whiteboard. Make yourself, or a piece of graph paper. If you don't own a whiteboard, A, $20 on Amazon can solve that problem if you'd like. B, you don't need to spend any money. You shouldn't spend your money at Amazon, spend it in a local business. But all of the windows in your home are fantastic whiteboards. You can draw on them with whiteboard markers. You have a full-length mirror in your bedroom. Excellent. You got a massive whiteboard. But you can also draw on a piece of paper. But this kind of stuff is going to be super useful for like trying this out because there is a trickiness to this loop. That there's some easy mistakes to make. But notice that we're trying it out as we go. I'm not building anything else in the program yet. Save my work, hit refresh. Let's go and try some of those guesses. Moon's still correct. Index should be index of. Correct, present. Not going to score that second L anymore. Present empty string. And I'll just try out one or two more of the things that I wrote down in advance. I'll try out paper. All right, P's present in the wrong place. The A's present in the wrong place. This second P is exactly in the right place. L is, E is present in the wrong place, and there is no R in apple. And good sanity check. Let's make sure that that's correct. In terms of algorithmic thinking, this is probably the trickiest part of Wordle. So we've gotten that one out of the way. We got some stuff to figure out about how do we deal with updating the page and things like that. But now we can file away our score guess. Let's look at the next piece we're going to solve, and then we'll take a stretch break in a few minutes. I want to put the results of a guess into the browser. Now, I don't know where you all will be with this. For some of you, you've been learning JavaScript, but you've been learning JavaScript as like an algorithmic language where you're solving problems on leak code or things like that. That can be great stuff. But we're going to be dealing with the part of JavaScript that's about what's called the DOM. The DOM is what's in the web page, what's the representation of the web page. This here, we would say, is the DOM. And JavaScript can reach in and find out what's there, and JavaScript can change things that's there, which is exactly what we're going to do. We just made this array of correct, present, empty string, correct, and so on. And we're going to want to say, well, it's the very first guess the players made, so we're going to update this row. And I want to put in the letters that they guessed, and I want to change the color to the right color. So let's peel this apart for a sec. If I go back and look at my HTML, I'm going to have to find which is the first cell of the first guess, which is the second cell of the first guess. I'm going to have to find that part of the page. And this is where some CSS can really help us out. Not because we're going to use CSS to style things exactly, at least not right now, but you can use CSS selectors, the same kind of way you find things in HTML to make them look pretty. You use that in JavaScript to find things. So when you're in a browser, you'll always have this variable document. Document is your HTML page. It's the DOM from what you're seeing in the browser. And document on it has a method called query selector. In query selector, you can give it a CSS selector. I want to find the first thing with element type form on the page, and it found that. I want to find the very first table row on a page, and it found that. I can just use CSS selectors here. Now, we're going to break out a pretty fancy selector because I can find the first cell of the first row really easily. That's going to work for exactly 1 second, but I need to be able to say find the third letter of the fourth guess and such. In CSS, there's a selector. Technically, if you've been learning some CSS, this is called a pseudo selector. Let's start with colon. There's a pseudo selector called the nth child. And I'm going to give it the value of 2. And what did that find? It found the second TR on my page. Now, that TR has a bunch of TDs in it. So I'll use the descendant selector, the space between CSS selectors just says find this within this. And I'm going to look for the nth child. I'll just use 3 here as an example. And that is my third cell in my second row. A thing to note is that CSS starts counting at 1. Us JavaScript programmers are used to things starting with 0. So we're just going to have to remember that a little bit as we work on our code. CSS starts counting at 1. There are other ways we could have solved this. We could have put an ID on every single cell that says like, I'm row 0, cell 0. We could have put a bunch of IDs here, but we don't have to. Once you get comfortable with some CSS selectors, you can really find exactly what you want. If you want to learn more about this, there's a fantastic way to do so. There's a website called CSS Diner. That's not its URL, but it's what it's called. So you can just Google CSS Diner. And it's a gamified way to learn about CSS selectors. So if you want to get better at those, this is a really fun way to do so. Okay, with that in mind, let's take a look at what we need to do here for our update board. I'm gonna loop over each letter that they guessed, and I'm gonna find the right table cell. We're gonna use that selector we just wrote, and then we're gonna change it. So I will call my variable cell here, document query selector, and I'm going to look for the nth child. And for a moment, I'm just going to say 2 and 3. And that cell variable isn't going to be like the letter that's in that cell. It's going to be the cell itself, that cell of the table. Your editor should be able to help you out here. If you're using a smart editor like VS Code, it'll show you all the stuff you can do with a HTML element, which is a crazy number of things. But The thing that we're going to use is inner HTML. I set the HTML. What goes inside this? And VS Code can help you out. You don't have to remember how to spell inner HTML. You can just start typing HTML. It should fill that out for us. And I'm just going to put an X there. Save my work, refresh, call update board. Doesn't really matter what I pass in for those two things right now. But hey, we got something on the page. This is really helpful. You know, like don't make me think about the loop and the logic of the loop. Just prove that I can get my hand on something. Now we can go back and do this a little better. All right, I'm going to make a variable here for my selector just so I don't have everything on one giant line. And I'm going to say, I'm going to grab not always the second row. I want to use that variable, what number guesses this. But remember that in JavaScript, we're going to start counting at 0. CSS wants to count starting at 1, so let's make sure to add 1. All right. Now, if we got that right, query selector on document. Nth child, not a number. Oh dear. Because we have not yet assigned numGuess to a value. Let's go ahead and give that the value 0. Maybe missing a closing parentheses to IM. Let's try that out. There we go. Whatever guess we are, and I can change that numGuess and see that that's going to put it in the right place. Okay. Let's actually add our loop and fill in all the letters. So for let I equals 0, I up to the length of guess, up to the length of guess, I plus plus. And I'm not going to just always be the third letter. It'll be I, which is starting at 0. So let's add 1 to it. Close our parentheses. Now there's some tricky code here. This is a great place to drop a console log so I can see that that's doing what I wanted to do. So cell equals cell. And I'm going to set that to whatever letter of the guess we're going to put over. Let's try it out. Refresh. I'm not sure if I did that. There we go. That is a beautiful cat, Leanne. Now let's get in, and we'll take a break after this. Let's get in the scoring from our results. Remember that our results is that array of empty string, correct, present, and so on. And there's a reason why I use the words correct and present. And if you got a good memory, you may remember that we created CSS classes called correct and present. So what we're going to do is we're going to just take that word, whatever we have in the result array, and we're going to add that as a CSS class. So we've got our cell. On the cell, and if I just start typing the word class, again, you don't have to memorize everything, we'll find this thing that says class list. Awesome. What can I do with class list? Press dot, find out. I can add a new class. You can actually add multiple classes, but we don't need to add multiple classes. And I'm going to add whatever we have in the results array at this position. So this will be the word present. We're going to add as a class. The word correct. An empty string, which no class at all. Let's try it out. I'll put in moons and I'll say correct, present, nothing, present, nothing. Got one problem. The token provided must be empty. Oh, so we can't set it. Got the first three. It's not going to let us set this to an empty string. That's fine. Let's just say if results at I is not equal to an empty string. Oops. Go ahead, save, refresh. And there we go. Team, let's take a stretch break for a few minutes. We've talked about so far that idea of a call graph, getting a sense of how you're going to build things, just sort of seeing the HTML, CSS, build part of that call graph. It's 6:31. Let's take a stretch break for about 6 minutes, give you a bio break and such, and we'll get started again around 6:38. I'll see you there in about 6 minutes, team. team, we're going to get started in about 1 minute or so. Yeah, John.
If we have time, before moving on, can you talk through the syntax of line 101? And it might be something I just didn't get it long enough to look at, but it was hurting my head.
Well, it's a little hard to read. Um, let's break it up into pieces, which can always be helpful. So the row will be the guess plus 1, and the call will be I plus 1. We're going to be making a string. We're just making a string here. That's the only thing this line does. Complex string, but a string. tr nth child, that's that pseudo selector nth child. No space there. Very important. That pseudo selector goes butt up against the thing that it's pseudo selecting on. The way that we write this, and we wrote that in the browser so we could see it. It was working. Let's put this in my code because this may help us visualize, help me visualize when I go back and read this code next week, what I'm trying to build here. I'm trying to build this. And so I'm just gluing together these things, John. This is one way you can do it in terms of building a string. There's another way you can do it called a template string in JavaScript. Some of you may have met this idea where you can sort of put into your string some placeholders that say substitute that value there. If you know about that, feel free to use that. It's the same thing in the end. We're just building the string. Whichever of these two syntaxes you like better, they'll do the same thing for us.
Thank you very much.
So you're very welcome. All right, we get these nice console logs that are telling us what's happening, and we're going to keep them. I talk about this in my debugging talk, but like a good console log, its job is not there to help you with bugs. Its job is to help you figure out what your program's doing, so you don't have as many bugs. So this is great. We're gonna keep it in, and we're gonna keep especially in this one that talks about the function being called. All right, let's go back for a sec to our call graph and figure out what we should build next. Just find the right window here. All right, so we've got score guess. We've got update board. Let's look at try word. So try word. We're going to pass it the guess. It'll score it and then update the DOM. We've written those two parts. And then it should bump up the number of guesses. All right. So also it should check if this is a valid word. All right, we'll hold on to that for a sec. But we've got that score word or score guess function and score guess here. And get help from your editor. I just press open parentheses. It'll tell me what my function is supposed to take. This is being called with the guess, so I know the guess. And the secret is one of those variables that we created up at the top. So I can just use that. And score guess is going to return those results. That's that array of, present, correct, etc. We'll call update board. Update board takes the guess and the results. Bump up my number of guesses. We've got that num guess variable. I can just bump that up by 1. Lots of ways you could write that, whatever makes sense to you. If it's not a valid word, print an error and exit. Remember, we have that list of all valid words. So let's just see if it's in our list of valid words. We could use index of. There's also includes. Includes is even simpler. It just returns true or false. So if it's not true that valid words includes the guess, if it's true that it's not true that it includes the guess, let's print an error message. And I don't want to do the rest of the stuff, so I'll just return. There are other ways you could write this. We could have made this a, if it is in the word, do this stuff, else. I sometimes find that when something is wrong, it's a lot easier to just kind of deal with that GTFO and then do the correct thing. Sometimes that makes for code that's easier to read, but however you want to write that if condition or if else condition could work. Let's try it out. Now, right now, our secret is just undefined. We haven't yet gotten to the part of the code where we actually pick a secret word. So let's just hard code one for a moment. Our secret word will be apple. Save, refresh. Let's just make sure I got that secret set. Our secret word is apple. Let's try the word. Oops. Let's try the word moons. Let's try the word paper. And going back to the conversation Lee and I were having earlier, like, what's nice is I can let my shoulders relax a bit. Like, I already proved those were worked. We tried those out in several different, like, like it's just a lot easier and more pleasant to build things when you can rely on what's below you. That's our try words. Try word. We can work on handle submit. Handle submit is, we're not going to be calling handle submit. Handle submit is going to get called when the form is submitted. So let's figure out, how do we write something like that? All right. We'll play around in the console here for a moment. I'm just going to grab something. I'm going to use that query selector to go and document.query selector. Grab, I'll use the CSS selector hashmark guess. Hashmark is search by ID, and you may remember that I have an ID on the input box. There's my input box. Probably my form isn't a good name for that. I'll hit refresh and we'll come up with something a little bit more sensible. I'm going to just grab the form itself, which has an ID of guest-form, so I can search for that. Have a DOM element in the DOM. Again, there are a million things we can put on it. Things you'll use most often is add event listener. When this happens to this thing, call this function. I also have this button. Let's also find the buttons. We can kind of play with them. So I know that I only have one button on the page, so I'll just say grab the first button. Be that guy. Again, I can highlight over here to see if I got the right thing. And we'll start off with the button. We'll add an event listener. What kind of event are you listening for? What's the function that should be called? Now you have to know the names of what you're going to listen for. And I believe that I have in my slides a little bit of help here for you all on what the list of common ones are. No, I don't. But I'll point us towards a place we can learn that. That there's a whole ton, but there's honestly about 3 that you ever use in most things. And the first of which is click. How do we know this list? Let's go look at MDN. I hope you all have met MDN. That's basically the documentation for JavaScript. And there's a nice page here about the different kinds of event systems, and we'll ultimately list all of the different events, clicking on things, scrolling through things, and so on. Again, there's a lot of possibilities, but there's only some that you do most often. There's a nice intro page that will narrow that down to 4 or 5 basic examples. And we're going to start with exactly the same one they start with, a very popular one to show off first, the one that handles clicks. So and I've got to get this spelled right. I've got to spell the word click right. It's all lowercase, it's a string. When we click this button, please run this callback function. So let me go make a function first. Let's make a super simple function, console log hi. Now, if I do this, notice it said hi, but I haven't clicked a button. I haven't clicked that button. This may be obvious to some of you, it might be new for some of you. I'm not going to call the function. I want to actually pass the function itself. This is called a callback. Many of you will have met this term with this idea, callback. Provide this function itself. So you grab that button. I'm not going to call the function, just provide the function itself. Oh, hang on a sec, I refresh. Let me just get my say hi function back. All right. Unfortunately, my page is reloading. That may be a little mysterious. I said when I click the button, say hi, but my page is reloading. What normally happens when you click a button as part of a form, normally your browser takes you to a new web page. There's a lot of assumed behaviors browsers have, and I don't want to have it do its normal thing. So we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to tweak it slightly. My function say hi, I'm now going to have it take an argument. It's very conventional to call this EVT, but if you like it, if it makes more sense to you to call it event, that's also great. That just sounds a bit better. And that event will be passed to us, and it's an object. And it will have a method on it called prevent default. Hey browser, don't do the thing that you would do here. Now, if I hadn't been getting my button, if I had just been grabbing, say, my table, let's just do that quickly. Grab my table element, and on the table, I'll add an event listener, and that can click, call, say hi. I wouldn't need to worry about preventing the default because there is no normal behavior anyway. Just click on a table. But there is for buttons. And so hopefully this is gonna, I may need to go find my button again. Let's just go grab that. Don't do your normal thing. So there are times that people click buttons. There are times that people press enter in input fields. You might be the kind of person that's learned that you can just press enter in an input field. You don't have to like mouse over and push the button next to it and such. So I'm actually not going to, in real life, put a click listener on the button. That would work, but it might not work for people that just type and press return because they haven't clicked the button. Instead, forms themselves, I go grab my actual form. I'll be lazy. Oops, just say grab the first form because I know there's only one. With forms, I don't want to handle clicking on my form. That would just mean if I click there, boom, I try to guess the word. But there's a different event for forms called submit. If you press return in the input field, you submit the form. If you click the button, you've submitted the form. This is more broad. It will catch all of those things. Now, before I made a function and gave it the name handle submit, I'll just show you all because those of you that have been working with JavaScript for a while can know that you can also just inline a variable, a function sometimes. And I certainly could do that. So just if you want to see an example of that sort of thing, I'll do the same thing. I'll say prevent default, console log hi. All right, let's tear it apart. We found the form. On the form, when we submit the form, called this function. And again, right now, just so you can see both ways, because some of you may have seen a bunch of code that looks like this in other places, you can inline an anonymous form. I don't have to name the form. I'm just saying, make me a form right now, just so I can hand it to someone else. And that works. Let's go do some work in our editor. So I'll come down to our function called handle submit. This should score the word, update the DOM, but it needs to go and figure out what word we typed in. So I've got a little bit of starter code for us. I've got just that nice console log that will tell us, did this code run? My function takes that event, because JavaScript will pass that when it calls this function. Don't do the normal thing, browser. But what I need to find is their guess. All right, let's go back to the browser for a sec. What's my input? If you don't remember, great thing to do. You can just kind of come and hover over it. How can I find my input? Well, in my case, I already put an ID on it, so I don't need any kind of fancy pants selector. Just go and find the thing with the ID of input. And if I look at that, oops, did I not find it? Did I just tell us how to? Oh, it's called guess. It's not called input. Excuse me, all. Let's do that. Has an ID of guess. There we go. That's my input field. And on my input field, there's the value of what's in it. Now, I typed in lowercase. You couldn't see that, but you'll just take it on faith. I just had put some CSS in here, so it always shows that it's uppercase. That's just the CSS transition. But input value gives me back a string of what's in that input. Let's steal this code. Don't let the player guess more than the number of guesses they're allowed to make. Seems reasonable. Get the word, turn it into lowercase, and then call our try word, clear our form field. We have the num guess, which starts at 0. They're allowed to have 6 guesses, but since we start counting at 0, we could have made a different choice. We could have started at 1, but it's very conventional to start at 0 when you count things in JavaScript. So this is 6 actual guesses. With this equals 5, we're already done. So we're going to compare that to 1 minus, 1 less than that. So if this guess is greater than or equal to guesses minus, they've already lost the game. I'll just return. Or if you want to put a sad message in, feel free. All right, we've got their word. Let's lowercase it. Now, guess is already a string. And so you may or may not know this, but JavaScript, when you have a string, just pop here in my console to try this out. There's a function called toLowercase. We're just going to do that to that value. Call our try word. What do we decide that try word returns? It doesn't actually return anything, so we're just going to call it. Try word takes the guess, which we now have got. And then to be helpful, we just want to clear the input box so their last guess doesn't hang around when they type the new guess in. This might seem tricky, but it's going to be really easy. We already have the input, and we've already learned how we can read the value of an input. We can also set the value of an input. So let's just set it to an empty string. All right, what have we done here? We've said we're not calling handle submit. Please notice, we are not calling handle submit. But JavaScript will call it when our form gets submitted. We're going to say prevent the default thing from happening, and then go get the guess, find out what's in it, so on and so forth. We have to do the piece where we say, here's the function that should be called when a guess is made. I'm just going to put that below this one. We may find a better place to put that ultimately. Just going to use the code that we got working in the browser. So grab the form, which we do have a name for. We should probably use that, guess form. So I'll look for things with the ID of guess form. On that form, add an event listener. I'll be listening for the submit action. And when they submit, let's call handle submit. This code isn't in a function. It's just going to run when the page loads. If you're paranoid, have a little console log to make sure that you know that that has happened. Save, hit refresh, added our submit handler. You really get the value of the call graph here because I can look at this and I can remind myself that is the flow that's supposed to happen. Go look at your piece of paper and be like, yep, it hit all the things it was supposed to hit. So we're pretty close to having a fully working game. We do have one downside is the word is always apple, so it won't be much of a treat to play after the first time. Let's go back to our call graph and see what we have left to do. So we've now finished all of this top branch. I already gave us that little function choose. Let's just play with it to see what it does. You give it an array of things and it randomly picks one. It doesn't have to be numbers. It doesn't even care what they are. You just give it an array of things and it will pick one. If you've never used math random before, that's a good one to look up because it's definitely a super useful part of JavaScript. Math random returns a random number 0 up to but never actually equaling 1. So it could be 0, could be 0.1, could be 0.78, could be 0.999, but it will never actually equal 1. I have 10 items I want to pick from. Multiply that number by 10. MathFloor just says get rid of all the fractional parts. So just take that down to the nearest integer. This is pretty common idiomatic code. It's the kind of thing you can write once and just give it a good name and hold on to it. But that's going to pick a random thing from my array. So we got that one. We have one function left to worry about, which is the function that starts off the game. So what should it do? It should set number guesses to 0. We're doing that right now up here, but I'm going to stop doing that here because I want this game to be playable multiple times. So I'll do it here inside start. Let's set num guesses to 0. Sorry, is it num guess or num guess? But fortunately, we would get an error because of use strict. Good on that. Pick a random secret word. Well, we have that. Let's scroll all the way down. We got that list of good possible secrets, and we've got our choose function. So let's set secret. Remember, we already have a global variable called secret. Let's set secret to choose a, call it possible secrets. There we go. And then I can, to keep things tidy, I could move this code if I want to inside that start function. The start function is always going to get called because I'm always calling it. All right. We're no longer using Apple. Our start function is going to call. I'm going to console log what the secret is just because that'll help us debug things. Make the game a little bit less fun for us. But the word is panty. Let's search for Apple, and I got the PA correct and so on. And if I want to play a new game, well, we got so many things right, but we missed one thing in our string. How could we move the board back down to being plain? I'm going to leave that one for you all as a challenge treat. Of course, you can just hit refresh to load the page, but hopefully you've learned now how you can find the cells, and you could make yourself a nested for loop for each of the possible guesses. For each letter in that guess, you could set the inner HTML to an empty string. Let's play with that for 1 sec. So I'll just make a little variable here called first cell, document query selector, and I'll just use our first nth child, and then the nth cell within that. And that should give me that guy, top left, first and first, of course. If I set its inner HTML, now we met that class list, which we added things to, but we can also remove things from it. Now, take some playing around here. You can give it a list of all the things to remove from it. You don't actually give it a list. This function takes as many arguments as you want. That's one way we could solve that. Another way that we could solve that is there's something called set attribute, which actually just lets you set what the attribute you want to change this source to being something else. Set attribute lets us do that. And the other way we could do that is we could just set the class attribute to an empty string. So it doesn't, you're not removing just these two things, you're just saying there are no classes on this. So those are two possibilities. But that's a nice challenge for you. Make it so you can call that start function. It's resetting the logic, but not the actual DOM. And once you've done that, go crazy. Add a little button that says new game. Now you know how to listen for a click on it and click to start a new game. Or keep track of how many guesses it's taken them each time they played it. You got this on the third guess, you got this on the fourth guess, and such. Some ideas on how to move forward. I do have here in the zip file that you downloaded code that will resemble. I'm not working from memory here, so I'm sure that I picked different variable names and wrote things a little bit different, but I've got some pretty readable code here in the solution folder for you all. All sorts of interesting guesses. One that's a lot more sophisticated, but some of you may find this challenging. The real game Wordle, if you've ever played the game on the New York Times, instead of typing in a word, there's like a little miniature keyboard of buttons, you know, Q button, a W button, E button, an R button. You could even go crazy, make something fancy like that. But team, that's what I have for you tonight. Let me just give you some ideas of what I tried to show you and what I think are the things that are worth pulling together. Making that call graph before you start writing JavaScript, coming up with your game plan. And try to break things into smaller functions. You know, we broke down the function that just scores a word. It doesn't change anything on the page. Just like break things into small functions and make that drawing that will help you understand what calls what. Add those console logs at the top of each function that tell you that you got here and what you passed to it. That will get rid of half of the bugs you make as a programmer easily. And then as you write a function, go try it out right then. Like we didn't build the whole thing and then cross our fingers, pray that it worked. We built a small function and we tried it out. We built another small function, we tried it out. That can be really helpful. You saw me do some things like when we had a trickier line of code, like the line of code, for example, John, that you want to talk about. There was a lot of stuff going on, and like dropping in that little console log, your antenna can already wiggle that like that one I might have gotten wrong. So put that console log in there. We learned some basics on how to manipulate the DOM. There's a nice introduction to working with the DOM at MDN. So a nice introduction to the kinds of things you can do. We learned how to change the HTML within our HTML. We learned how to use query selector to get our hands on things. Then we also learned how to add event listeners. So how to add those functions that respond to things. That's what I was hoping to show you all tonight, team. Do you have questions or the things you'd like to talk about? Yeah, John.
The prevent default was new to me. Are there other behaviors aside from reloading that you would ever want to prevent?
There aren't many. The common ones are you you have a link, an ahref on a page, like the anchor tag on a page, but you want to do something in JavaScript, not have it actually go to another page. And so normally, of course, if I have, I'll just put an a tag here, and I, blah, 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 you know, google.com kind of thing. That's not going to show me a box. That's going to take me here and such. There are times that you may want to do something when someone clicks a link. And so you may want to prevent the default from happening. So clicking links because you want to do something fancier in JavaScript. It looks like a link, but when you click it, it really just lights up a pink box somewhere else on the page, whatever. That may be something you want to prevent. Submitting forms, you might want to prevent. Those are the most common things you might. Once in a while, you'll tinker with forms of like, you're not allowed to type this second, a vowel a second time. And so I'm going to be listening for keystrokes and I'm going to prevent it from letting you add it and such. But those are far less common. Submitting forms and clicking links are going to be the big ones. It will never hurt you to prevent default if there wasn't a default anyway. So a good way to think about it, John, is unless you want the browser to do something, you don't have to memorize all the times there is a default, just prevent it. Like the prevent default method will be available even if there wasn't a default to begin with. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah, thank you. Um, I'm I'm going to roll off another question if that's okay. And when in the code that we wrote tonight, when you enter a word that's not a word, could you just tell us what happens? I think I can fix it. That was incomplete in my head
Um,
because it was just leaving the function, right?
yeah, we console log an error message, um, but we're not doing anything. Oh, this is my solution. Let me go to the code that we wrote, just because it'll be more recognizable. Um, yeah, John, do you know alert in browsers?
Yes.
So that, your users won't necessarily have the console open unless your users are themselves programmers, but you might find popping up an alert box. It's kind of an old school UI, but that certainly will give the user feedback. Or what you might enjoy playing with, John, is maybe you want to sometimes show a message down here make a div for it or paragraph or whatever you want. And then when you want to show them an error, go find that div, set its inner HTML to be that's not a word and such. That would be a fancier approach where instead of popping up a box that pauses the game, just, show them a message somewhere on the screen. And a great way to do that is just put the box that you want in the HTML. You don't have to create that in JavaScript. It won't take up any space. You won't be able to see it because there's nothing inside of it. But since you now have a sense of how you can go and find that on the page, set its inner HTML to be that's not a valid word, for example. That would be a fancier approach.
Okay. Yeah, in terms of our just gameplay, the number of guesses is not changing after that. What happens though, as we wrote it tonight? Does it go back to
It just returns from this file. It does whatever you want, tell them they did something wrong, and it just returns from this try word function. So I'm not dinging them for that guess. The New York Times doesn't, and I surely can't be better than the New York Times. But if you want to make a mean version of the game, you can absolutely just bump up num guess. But remember that try word is called by the handle guess, and handle guess gets run every time they submit a word. Um, there is one um, there's one slightly subtle thing. I'm not clearing their guess here, but we can go look at our handle submit, excuse me, and do clear the word. You might find that you only want to clear the word if they gave you a valid word. Maybe they misspelled a word and you want to keep it in the search box. So you might play, excuse me, you might play with, do you want to do this every time, clearing the old guess, or do you want to just do it once you've figured out that their guess was a valid word? So you could play with moving that around also to change that experience a bit.
great? Thank you, Joel. This was super fun.
Awesome. Anything else you all want to talk about? Well, I hope you learned some things. I hope you had a good time. Thank you for spending your evening or night or wherever in the world you all are with me. Go forth, build yourself some small games. They're way more fun than leak code problems. And writing things that involve multiple functions and that you have to think about how to design a program will really advance your JavaScript. So, you know, play with your, a really simple favorite card game or a really straightforward puzzle or things like that. Those kind of things give you good thing. Like Wordle is a nice mix of we had to learn some dumb, but then we had to figure out the kind of algorithm for scoring a guess. And a lot of games have little algorithmic challenges like that. It can be quite a pleasure to work through. But in any event, I'm Joel. I'm the VP here at Rhythm School. If you're looking to move into this for a career, that is the business that we're in. Um, you can certainly find out all about us. We're at rhythmschool.com. We're full stack boot camp. We are taught by, we're not a big school. We don't want to be a big school. All of our lead instructors are senior engineers. Um, I was a senior engineer at Apple. I have a doctorate in my field. Like we're interested in teaching this stuff well in small, intimate classes. If that's interesting for you, feel free to reach out. Otherwise, very nice meeting you all. Have a wonderful night.